Once you have the basic framework of your family set up with reference planes, constraints, and parameters, it's time to start adding some geometry. In this movie, we're going to look at adding solid form geometry to our family. So I'm in a file called Adding Solids, and it is slightly different than where we left off in the previous movie, so you might want to use this one even if you've been following along in your own. But let me just point out to you what's different about it. I've added 2 reference planes here in the elevation view. The top one is at 2'7" off the floor, and the other one's at 3 inches. And both of those, I created a dimension and locked it, and a dimension and locked it. So that's going to establish those 2 heights and keep them locked at that distance off the floor. So that's the only thing I changed there. All right, I want to make sure my floor plan is active. And if you don't have tiled views, you might want to make sure that you open up your front and your left and your 3D view and tile them like I've done here. Let's go to the Create tab, and we're going to start with the simplest type of solid form that we have, a solid extrusion. A solid extrusion is just a shape that you draw, you sketch it out in whatever view, and then when you finish it, it extrudes to a certain thickness. Pretty straightforward. We're going to do a simple rectangle in this case. So I'm going to snap this rectangle from the intersection of these 2 reference planes over to the intersection of these 2 reference planes. When these little padlocks appear, I want to lock it on all 4 sides. That's going to make sure that this shape stays attached to those reference planes. Now let's click the Finish button here and see what we got. We've got a rectangle here in the plan view, and it shows up in both of the elevations. And if I come over here to the 3D view and look at my little view cube here, if you can find the top corner of the view cube, you can click that, and it will zoom in on that object. You might want to go to the visual style and choose shading instead of wireframe, just to get a better look at this, and you can spin it around by holding down your shift key and dragging your wheel. Now, I'm going to deselect it, and what we'll, of course, notice here in the 3 different views that show it vertically is that it's a big, thick slab and it's sitting on the floor, okay? Now, there's a few ways we could remedy that. I'm going to show you the simplest way first, and that's just to select the box. Note that it has grip handles at top and bottom, and you can just drag those up, snap and lock it, drag this one up, snap and lock it to the 2 different reference planes that are here in the file. That will give me a slab that's now floating above the floor at the correct height. And of course, the next most important step is always to flex. So I want to make sure that this geometry that I've just created is actually behaving the way it ought to. So I'm going to go to my family types, and you recall from the previous movie, we set up 2 types. Let's try the 7-foot type. Let's click Apply. You'll notice that it changes shape. That's good. We'll go back to the 8-foot type, click OK, and it will return to the original shape. So far so good. There's our first solid form. Now, I want to point out one other thing about this reference plane that I provided here in the starting file, the one that's at 2'7" off the floor. It's got a name associated with it, Playing Surface. Now, the way that you name a reference plane is you simply select it, and then over here on the Properties palette, you just type in a name. You can type in anything you like. By naming this reference plane as Playing Surface, I can avoid the problem we just had with the extrusion. And that is that I can draw it at the height that I want it to occur at instead of drawing it on the floor and then having to move it up. So let's take a look. I'm going to go back to the floor plan view, make that the active view, go back to my Create tab, and over here on the Work Plane panel, I want to click the Set button, and we're going to set that named work plane as the current work plane. Now, the last time we were in this dialog was in one of the previous movies, and we used the Pick a Plane option. This time, we're going to use the Name option because if you open up the list, you'll see Playing Surface is one of our choices. Any reference plane that you give a name to will appear here on this list. So I'm going to choose Playing Surface and click OK. And now we're going to be working up at that 2'7" level. And let me show you how that works here by creating a solid sweep. An important tip that I want to give you before we start building the sweep. We want to hide this slab right here temporarily in this floor plan view. I can do that by selecting it and go to the little sunglasses. We've seen this before in previous movies, and I'm going to choose Hide Element. Now, the reason I want to do that is I want to be sure that when I'm sketching my sweep, that I am snapping to these reference planes, not the solid geometry. It's a really good habit to get into to always build your geometry relative to reference planes, not other geometry if you can avoid it, okay? So that's what we want to make sure that we're doing here. Now I'm going to go to the Create tab again. I'm going to click on the Sweep button, and the first step in creating a sweep is to designate the path. So I'm going to do that with the Sketch Path tool, and I get all my standard shapes, and I'm going to draw a rectangle, but instead of snapping it directly to this shape, I'm going to come over here and put in an offset. And in this case, I want to put in an offset of 3 inches. Come over here, snap from here over to here. Now, if your shape isn't going outside, tap your space bar and that will flip it. If you're seeing this where it's on the inside, just tap the space bar and it will go to the outside and then click your other point. Now, I'm going to change the offset back to 0, switch to the line tool, and I'm going to zoom in at one of the corners, and I want to draw a little chamfered corner right there. Go to my Trim and Extend tool and clean that up. And I want to do that on all 4 corners. So I'm going to zoom back out, zoom previous, and repeat. And so I'll have a nice chamfered corner at all 4 edges. I'm going to click the Finish Edit mode. That completes the path. So you know that the path is complete because it changes color from magenta to black. Now, over here in the 3D view, what you'll notice is there's this little cross symbol right there. That is the plane that the profile will occur on. So what you want to do is find a view that looks right at that plane. And here in the left elevation view is a good choice. And I'll zoom in nice and closely on that area. And we can either sketch the path or we can actually load in a pre-sketched path. Now that's what we're going to do in this case to save a little time. I went to a new family. I used the Profile Family template. This is just a 2-dimensional family. I sketched out the shape that I wanted to use as a profile, saved it, and gave it a name. And if we use the Load Profile button right here, we can load, go to our exercise files folder, and we can load in that family, which I called Rail. Click Open. And then right here on the list, I can open that up and Rail will be loaded there as a choice. And you'll see this shape right here. So again, you can sketch your own shapes if you like to, and it just saves us a little bit of time in the sketching. Now, you can move this anywhere that you like. So you can see it's kind of floating away from the table there. I'm going to undo that. But you can use any of our move methods to get it to match up to the table. I'm going to use Align because I think Align is a good choice here. And I'm going to align with the edge of the table and this face of the rail, like so. That gives me the relationship that I'm looking for. And then finally, if I come up here and click the Finish Edit mode, you'll see, and 3D probably shows this the best, you'll see the bumper rail swept around the solid form of the playing surface, and it creates a nice convincing pool table effect. So there's a few examples of using solid forms to help build the geometry for your family. In the next movie, we'll look at void forms, and we'll use those to create the pockets in our pool table.